My name is Lucas, and this is Chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for audiobook. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mr. Dursleys of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved with anything strange or mysterious because they didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Miss Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came very useful as she spent much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursley had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was someone would discover it. They didn't think they could beat it if anyone found out about the Potters, Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Dursley's sister. But they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister was good-for-nothing husband, or as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think that what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dudley woke up that dull gray Tuesday on Starry Stars, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled, screaming, Dudley into his high chair. None of them had noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed because Dudley was having a tantrum and throwing his cereal out the walls. Little tyke, told Mrs. Dursley. As he left the house, he got into his car and backed out of the number 4's drive. It was the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen, and then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake, and he put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward the town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind, but by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help but noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of those weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived at the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills than morning. I didn't see the owls swooping past in the broad daylight through people down in the street. They pointed and gazed upon, open-mouthed, as owl after sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in very good mood until lunchtime, when then he thought he'd stretch his leg and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This bunch were whispering excitedly, too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past clutching a large donut in a bag that he caught a few more words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at the secretary to not disturb him, seized his telephone, and almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind, put the receiver back down, and stroked his mustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such a usual name. He was sure that there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never ever seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying. Mrs. Dursley, she always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that, but all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset of being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know too has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating. This is a happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle, walked off. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had just been hugged by a complete weird stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of this imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one, the same markings around his eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. "Mrs. Dursley," Mrs. Dursley had a nice day, normal day. She told him over the dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, won't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normal. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in the time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that national owls have been behaving very unusual today. Although owls normally hunt at night, they are hardly ever seen in daylight. There have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed for their sleeping pattern. The newscatters allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious, and now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of the owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting really odd today. Viewers tell me that instead of rain, I promised yesterday, they have downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks. Promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair, shooting stars all over Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and whispers about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room, carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretend she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news. Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owl, shooting stars. There are a lot of funny people looking out in town today. So? Well, I thought maybe it was something to do with, her crowd. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared to tell her he heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty common name if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mrs. Dursley. Mr. Dursley's heart sinking horribly. Yes, I quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept in the bedroom window and peered down into a front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Pivot Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have to do with the Potters? Well, if it did, if it got out of that they were related to the pair, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well that he had Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up with anything that might be on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but that cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting all over as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Pivot Drive. It didn't so much as quiver. when the car door slammed on the next street, nor when 2 owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner. The cat had been watching appeared so suddenly and so silently. You'd have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched. Its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Pivot Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, and judging by the silver of his hair and his beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept to the ground, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles on his nose. His nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This named man was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in the street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something, but he didn't seem to realize he was being watched because the look of suddenly at the cat. He was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He found what he was looking for inside his pocket. He seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up and in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a dark little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into the darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer until the only lights were left on the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped out the putter-outer back inside his cloak and sat off the street, set toward number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had been gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses, exactly the shape of markings that the cat had around its eyes. She was too wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into the tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How do you know it was me?" she asked. "How do you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly." "You'd be stiff. You've been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful now. Even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it, flocks of owls shooting stars." "Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet it was Daldus Diggle. He never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had a precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. "But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are bearing downright careless out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in the Muggle clothes, swapping rumors." She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore, here as hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on, a fine thing it would be if on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you-know-who has gone, my dear Professor Surly, as a sensible person like yourself can tell himself by his name, all this you-know-who nonsense for 11 years. I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing. If we keep saying you-know-who, I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you-know-who, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky. It's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Albus Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying and why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him?" It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached a point, the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real person she had been waiting on cold hard wall all day. For neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such piercing stare as she did now. It was a plan that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe until Dumbledore told her is true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop. She did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are that they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James, I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying that he tried to kill the Potter son Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, flattered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him, but how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a laced handkerchief and dabbed her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers in it. Instead, little plants were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he had put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd been here, by the way? Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here of all places? I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here? Cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at the number 4 Dumbledore. You can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up stairs, the street screaming for sweets. Harry Potter come and live here? It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall, faintly sitting back down the hall. Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be a legend. It wouldn't even be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in the world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn anybody's head, famous before we can talk and walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. You can't see how much better of it. He'll be growing up away from that until he's ready to take it. Professor McGonagall opened her mouth and changed her mind. Swallowed and then said, Yes, you're right, of course, but how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly as though she thought he might be kidding. Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to. What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of headlight. It swelled to roar as they both looked up in the sky, and a huge motorcycle fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of him. If the motorcycle was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting in the astride inside it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild, long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid him from most of his face. He had hands the size of trash can lids, and his feet in the leather boots were like baby dolphins. And in his vast muscular arms he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. And where did you get that motorcycle? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir. Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, climbing back off the motorcycle as he spoke. Young Cyrus Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir. No problems were there. No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but they got him all out right before the muggles started swimming around. He fell asleep as we was flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundles of blankets inside. Just visible was a baby boy, fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a seriously shaped cut. A bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. You'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy. I have one myself above my left knee, and that is the perfect map of the London United Underground. Well, give him here. Hagrid. We'd better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned toward the Dursleys' house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. Bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. And then suddenly Hagrid let out a howl that sounded like a dog. Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the Muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor little Harry off to live with these Muggles. Yes, it's all very sad. But get the best grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep and took the letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two for a full miniature. The three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked fiercely, and the twinkling light usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Dumbledore's family, that's that. We've got no business staying here. We may as well go join the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'd best get this bike away from night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore bowled. Sir? Wiping his streaming eyes off his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorcycle and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, except Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out a silver protractor. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back into their street lamps, so that Pivot Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out Tabby Cat slinking around the corner. At the other end of the street, he could just see a bundle of blankets on the step in number 4. Good luck, Harry, he muttered. He turned his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the heat edges of Pivot Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky black sky. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him and slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. And he couldn't know that this very moment people meeting in a secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying, hushed, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." And that is the end of The Boy Who Lived, Chapter 1 of The Sorcerer's Stone for the audiobook. And I will see you next time.